Welcome to Goat vs. Fish.
Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Do you be fish? Do you be fish? Do you be fish? Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Or do you be fish? Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Well, goats are of the land and fish are of the sea. But goat versus fish, which one do you be? Do you be goat or a fish? Meh. Do you be goat or a fish? Boom, 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 boom. Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Now repeat after goat versus fish. Doobie 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 goats, do be goats, do be goat, do be goat, or do be fish, do be fish, or do be goat, or a fish. Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Well, goat versus fish.
Welcome, Goat and Fish, to another exciting versus of Goat versus Fish. And it's a pre-versus, it's an early versus, it's a late versus. It's 1:03 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And Goat vs. Fish has deigned to bring you a versus of Goat vs. Fish. Do you believe in Goat vs. Fish? Do you believe in yourself? Celebration.
Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. The video event sitter sits on the fence. But the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish?
That was Do You Be Goat or Fish on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube under the artist Goat vs. Fish. Wasn't that a nice versus? Wasn't that a nice versus? Wasn't that a nice versus? And we have our first one here in the chat of Goat vs. Fish. Our first one here in the chat of Goat vs. Fish. And aren't we pleased? Aren't we pleased to have them? A very special one joining now, Goat vs. Fish. Joining now, Goat vs. Fish. Joining now, Goat vs. Fish. Make some noise, make some noise. Make some noise for Mem. 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 That's not how you friggin' pronounce it, okay? It's pronounced Bethlehem. It's pronounced Bethlehem. It's Bethlehem. Okay? I don't memlemhem like sounds like you're friggin' coughing something out of your friggin' throat. Like you got sick with the fucking turd flu. Forgive my friggin' language. Yeah, you memlemhem. Friggin' gross. Oh hey, it's friggin' Jedi Grind. I just want you to know that actually, I want you to know you're friggin' beneath me, Jedi Grind, that I don't really particularly care that you worship a friggin' fake-ass George Lucas religion that's been now rebooted more times than I'm gonna break my sandal off on your ass. Let me friggin' repeat myself. That you worship a friggin' George Lucas religion that's been rebooted more times than I'm gonna break my friggin' sandal off in your ass. Ahem. Memlemhem. That's not friggin' pronounced right. It's friggin' Bethlehem. You're versing too early, Jesus Christ. You're versing too early. We haven't even gotten to your verses yet. Well, friggin' excuse me. Okay. Are you goat or are you fish? Still not friggin' answering. Goat and fish, Jesus Christ is back on the verses. Jedi Grind Goat, celebration for Goat, celebration for Goat. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I 1, 2, 3, 4 with a late fish, celebration for fish. And a bitter shark raids Goat versus fish. A bitter shark raids Goat versus fish. Celebration for a bitter shark raids Goat versus fish. 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 It was a balloon eye goldfish, the whole verses. Oh, aren't you feeling bitter now? Aren't you feeling bitter now, you bitter sharks? You came for a bitter shark and you just got a puffy balloon eye goldfish. Aww. Oh, my verses, look at it. Eyes billowing upon you. Welcome, a bitter shark raiders, to Goat versus Fish. Your one verses for the one true question. A bitter shark. Here late, and a bitter shark actually joins us now on Goat versus Fish.
Hello, yes, I am a bitter shark, and thank you for joining us, and yes, I'm very bitter, and I am a shark, so it's going to be fish.
Celebration for a bitter shark who joined us just now through voice communication on Goat versus Fish. It has to travel along verses to get here on Goat versus Fish, so it may have sounded slightly less like the bitter shark that you are used to, but it's definitely a versus. Memlemhem subscribes to Goat versus Fish. Memlemhem. Celebration and welcome to a late verses of Goat versus Fish. And the verses is, are you goat or are you fish? Flunk Waffle, welcome back to Goat versus Fish. A bitter shark with the shark emotes. You can see all those sharks right there in the verses. And Jedi Grind with the applause for all of the celebration happening here on Goat versus Fish. Memlemhem says goat or fish and unification and fences, but the verses is Memlemhem. Are you goat or are you fish? Memlemhem. You who subscribe to Goat versus Fish with a mighty verses, and 26 radiations from a bitter shark. Let's give a shout out to a bitter shark. A shout out to a bitter shark. A shout out to a bitter shark who's very bitter and very shark. What are you so bitter about? Oh, and Jedi Grind with the gifted verses. 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 Or as we like to say in the verses. As we like to say in the verses. Go. Go, goat versus fish. It seems we have run out of power in the verses. Seems we have run out of power in these verses. Aww. Well, we'll just have to do a combination verse. Combination verses. Subscription. 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 Goat versus fish. 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 Appreciation for the Jedi Grind subscription to Goat versus Fish and Mem Lem Hem Lem Hem Lem Hem. The Bitter Shark Radiation. This versus is beginning mightily with the in the beginning there was Goat versus Fish. And look, and look, and look, and look. That shark isn't looking so bitter anymore. That shark isn't looking so bitter anymore. Aww. That shark isn't looking so bitter anymore, but if you stare deep into the eye of the bitter shark, beware. The depths of the universe will stare back at you. Nothing. The bitter shark. Don't let that smile fool you. This shark is tart. Tart shark. Tart shark. Shark tart. Enjoy delicious Goat versus Fish shark tarts, now filled with your favorite shark filling. Take a bite out of shark tarts. Mem lem hem. Are you goat or are you fish? Nice verses, Goat versus Fish. You see how it doesn't blur out Goat versus Fish as much now when we point the verses at you? It still gets somewhat fuzzification, but it's not as harsh as it once was. It is not as harsh as it once was. Bowser, Big Bean Burrito, welcome to Goat versus Fish. Am I a hybrid? Are you goat or are you fish? Mem lem hem. Are you goat or are you fish? Bowser, Big Bean Burrito with a shark tail, Celebration, celebration. How was your stream? That's what the ones say to one another. They say, how was your stream? Isn't that what they say when someone does a radiation? They say, hello, streamer. Thank you for the radiation. How was your stream? 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 Appreciation for the level 1 hype training. 63%. Your community contributed 2 gifted subs. Wow, they're really going easy on the hype trainings, these verses. Hype training used to mean something on Goat vs. Fish. New Vegas 1,000. Welcome back to Goat vs. Fish. New Vegas 10,000. Are you goat or are you fish? Counting the verses, a bitter shark. A bitter shark with a radiation of 26. That's 26 radiation points for fish. New Vegas says, I don't know what I am. And here we have the previous verses. Farewell to the goat and fish. It was a triumph for goat. It was a triumph for goat.
Make some noise for the goat. Make some noise for the goat.
It was a triumph for goat.
Make some noise for the goat.
Jedi Grind the Goat is in the verses. Jedi Grind the Goat is in the verses. And with the gifted subscription, that's 500 verse points for goat. That's 500 verse points for goat. Each bit is 1 verse point. Each tip is 1 verse point for every cent donation to Goat vs. Fish. And even though they have discontinued the cent, Goat vs. Fish will still accept your pennies on Goat vs. Fish. Penny for your verses. Goat vs. Fish, 500 from Jedi Grind. And New Vegas also does not know what I am. Mem is I'm a hybrid question. A bitter shark is fish. A bitter shark is fish. Let's get that fish. Let's get that fish versing. Celebration for a bitter shark fish with the massive radiation. Flunk Waffle says goat celebration. Flunk Waffle goat. Flunk Waffle goat. Welcome back to Goat vs. Fish. Flunk Waffle, welcome back to Goat vs. Fish. And Goat vs. Fish declares that Flunk Waffle is the winner of the Goat vs. Fish costume contest. Celebration. Flunk Waffle, you did it! Goat vs. Fish declares that Flunk Waffle has won the Octoberus Goat vs. Fish Fensoween costume contest. We have declared it just now. Congratulations. You have won 42 verse American dollars. That's 42 verse American dollars. And a shirt of Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish, that was the promise of Goat vs. Fish. We received 2 entries, and now we're giving you 42 verse American dollars. Julian Mr. Humdinger rates Goat vs. Fish. Julian Mr. Humdinger rates Goat vs. Fish. Some kind of content says, forgive me, Lord. We will forgive you when you choose goat or fish. Some kind of content. Are you goat or are you fish? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Celebration. Julian Mr. Humdinger brings a school of sleeping fishes. Celebration. That's 500 with the resubscription. That's 500 for fish. That's 500 for fish. On a 52-month streak. Celebration. 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 Let's make a verses. Let's make a verses here. Let's make a verses here. Let's make a verses here. Goat versus Fish, always finding new ways to calculation. Goat versus Fish. And we have 52 months of Goat versus Fish, so we're going to give 52 month points for fish from Julian Mr. Humdinger for being 52 months of subscription. These month points can only be gained. And Julian Mr. Humdinger with 30 for Goat versus Fish. Another 30 for the fish. Jedi Grind, they're just going totally fish. 56 now for Julian Mr. Humdinger with the fish. New Vegas 10,000 says choose fence. You can't choose fence. You don't get to choose fence. You don't get to choose fence. Julian, Mr. Hum, Julian Hum. Mr. Humdinger, Mr. Humdinger raised goat versus fish with a 52 months of subscription, a whole school of sleepy fish. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Welcome back to Goat vs. Fish. Memlemhem says fish. Memlemhem, are you choosing fish after all these verses? Are you choosing fish after all these verses? Memlemhem, your subscription, does it count for goat or does it count for fish? Memlemhem. Willow D says fish. Willow D says fish. That's a fish. That's a fish in the verses. New Vegas says, I will now choose fish. Celebration off the fence. The fence sitter has gotten off the fence. The fence sitter has gotten off the fence. Celebration for fish. And Jedi Grind can't believe these verses. New Vegas 10,000 goes fish. New Vegas 10,000 goes fish. But what about? And Memlemhem going fish. Memlemhem, that looks like a declaration of fish. That looks like a fish declaration. It looks like you're celebrating fish. Memlemhem, are you going fish? Final verses until the next final verses. Memlemhem, are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? You have subscribed to Goat vs. Fish at tier 1 to Goat vs. Fish. Memlemhem goes goat. Ah, what a reversal of verses. What a reversal of verses. Memlemhem goes goat, joining Jedi Grind. Joining Jedi Grind in the verses against the fish. And that's now 1,000 verse points for goat, 1,000 verse points for goat, and 1 month of verse points. 1 month of verse points. 1 month of verse points for the goat with 1 month of subscription to Goat vs. Fish. Wow, those verse points. They were going to be on the verses. We were going to do a poll to see who won those verse points, Goat and Fish. We were going to poll who won the verse points. But that poll. John the Fisherman, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Are you goat or are you fish? John the Fisherman, are you goat or are you fish? Time for Goat vs. Fish. Oh, great. I am fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for John the Fisherman Fish. For John the Fisherman Fish. For John the Fisherman Fish. And we've got an old verses. We got an old verses. We got Noel versus happening on Goat vs. Fish. Someone has started a poll on Goat vs. Fish. And we've got, it says, even though there is no good or evil, there's only goat and fish. Some verses, you're just served a verses, and something seems a bit fancy about it. But you can vote in this verses. We've got a poll going on Goat vs. Fish, and the poll is good fish, old goat, and fence versus. And New Vegas redeems a celebration for fish. John the Fisherman goes fish. So let's get another fish in the verses. Appreciation, a bitter shark, and Julian Mr. Humdinger raid Goat vs. Fish. A shout out for Julian Mr. Humdinger and subscription. John the Fisherman subscription to Goat vs. Fish. John the Fisherman, Goat vs. Fish is receiving a premonition. Celebration, John the Fisherman with 6 months of Goat vs. Fish. Yes, that's the verses. Another 500 verse points for fish. And 6 months of Goat vs. Fish. That's 58. That's 58 month points for fish. 58 month points for fish. And Bacon Spirit, welcome back to Goat vs. Fish. Are you goat or are you fish? And Old Goat is just taking the verses, crushing the verses, you could say. Let's get that verses into the stream of Goat vs. Fish. Stream manager, manage the poll. Gigantification, giant head of Goat vs. Fish. It's a giant head of Goat vs. Fish. And pitiable that Goat vs. Fish cannot see them this way. Oh, there's the giant head of Goat vs. Fish. And let's get this verses. of goat versus fish going on goat versus fish. Goat versus fish, goat versus fish. There's the verses. There's the verses. Wow. Ooh, celebration. There's the verses now. There's the verses now. What they're claiming is a good old verses, though there is no good or evil, only goat and fish. But there's the verses. There's the verses. There's the verse. There's the verse again. Who's voting for goat and who's voting for fish? We have 354 for fish, and we have 29 for goat. Wait, it's 3 verses. It's 32 for goat. It's 32 for goat, and it's 368 for fish, and 2 for the fence, and only 2 for the fence. Giant goat emote. We've got Julian Mr. Humdinger with a gigantification of goat versus fish, and Willow D with a giant goat emote. Well, Willow D, you may be a fish, but that giant goat emote is going to goat. It's going to goat. No, wait, it's going to fish. You're a fish. It's maybe a goat emote, but that goat emote is mocking the goat. New verses, it's mocking the goat. Julian Mr. Humdinger with a giant fish, So that's 64 fish, Julian Mr. Humdinger with 64 fish, and 30 now for goat, Goat versus fish. No, it's all for fish. It's all for fish. Yes, it's all for fish. It's all for fish. And this is a long pole. It's a long fishing pole. It's a long goating pole. Fish aren't taking this one flopping. They've got 195 now going for fish and 519 for old goat. And a fence versus now coming up with 21. Memlem Hem says big goat. Oh, my fish looks amazing. Lol. Wow, goat is really mopping the floor. Wow, what looks amazing to goat versus fish? Goat versus fish. Does goat versus fish look amazing to you? We have been modification. Our lenses are on goat versus fish. We're making goat versus fish. Goat versus fish is lit. It's a beautiful celebration. And we have goat liking the stream on YouTube. We have fish liking the stream on YouTube. It's all a big celebration. 99 LSD OCD, welcome to Goat vs. Fish on YouTube. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. 99 LSD OCD, are you goat or are you fish? Be sure to like the stream. And if any of you wish to like the stream on YouTube, go and like the stream on YouTube, Goat and Fish. It helps promotion Goat vs. Fish. It all helps promotion Goat vs. Fish. But Goat vs. Fish would never tell you to go like the stream on YouTube, not while simultaneously live streaming on Twitch. That would be against terms of verses. But Goat vs. Fish would definitely suggest that it is a thing that you could do, even though Goat vs. Fish is not telling you to do anything at all. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. And 573 now for fish. 663 for goat. Goat versus fish. We need to charge the power of goat versus fish. Goat versus fish is going to go charge the power of goat versus fish.
Make some noise for the goat. 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 Celebration Thunder Checks. Welcome again to Goat versus Fish. Welcome again to Goat versus Fish. This shall be a mighty versus. This is the current versus.
Fresh versus.
Oh, my versus. This shall be a mighty versus. Are you goat or fish?
1,000 for fish. 1,000 for fish. Suddenly old goat are lagging behind. I know I was positively goat would take it New Vegas. When you go to Vegas and you're feeling in a gambling versus, are you betting it all on goat, or are you going to hedge your versus with fish? It's kind of a fence bet. They say insurance is a fence bet. You don't need insurance with goat versus fish. You just need assurance that you are goat or fish. Assurance. The fence sitter wants assurance. It's like, oh, who to be my sure ass self? Nate DeBake says, fish, fish, fish. GP Bear, Pleasant New versus you, Pleasant New versus you. Wow, Fish is winning now. Wow, Fish is winning now. Jedi Grind has given up. Jedi Grind has given up, and with a prize, Jedi Grind with a gifted versus to Nate DeBake for Fish. Jedi Grind giving up most gracefully. Goat and Fish, anything can happen in the deep, late verses. Jedi Grind with a gifted versus. Jedi Grind, celebration. Nate DeBaked, sneaky creature. While fish, our domination in the poll, Jedi Grind extends the lead of goat. GP Bear, are you goat or are you fish? Robo Hamo. Claiming, help me, Jedi Grind, says Robo Hamo. What do you need, Robo Hamo 99? GP Bear is a dirty little fence sitter. Dirty fence creature. Mads Bray says, free bird. Lol, what's up, free bird? Hold the verses. You want free bird on goat versus fish? You come into goat versus fish and you request free bird? There is no bird. There is only goat and fish. There is only goat and fish. Free yourself from the shackles of the fence. Free yourself from the illusion of bird. Birds are not real. You heard? Have you heard that birds are not real? Are you goat or are you fish? Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Please join the verses. Celebration. Join Goat vs. Fish. Join Goat vs. Fish. Let us tickle your verses. Celebration. And Good Fish wins the verses with 1,475. Old Goat with 903. Celebration. I saw a guitar. Did you? Oh. We're not getting your reference there. But Mads Bray, can we get a welcome to Mads Bray in the chat of Goat vs. Fish? They might be new to Goat vs. Fish. They might be thinking that Goat vs. Fish is picking on them, but this is just Goat vs. Fish welcomes you to Goat vs. Fish. Welcome Mads Bray to Goat vs. Fish. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Welcome, appreciation to the community of Goat vs. Fish who welcomes all of you to Goat vs. Fish. And LSD 99 OCD, are you goat or are you fish? GP Bear is on the fence. Lol, I'm 37, no harm done. Appreciation. Some of the ones here can be so fencing young that they can't tell. Well, they can't tell a fish from a goat, and then we have to education them all about Goat versus Fish and celebration. But are you goat or are you fish? One's young and old, no matter how many verses the stories have been told, you must choose goat or fish. And look, Jedi Grind is 74. Jedi Grind is 74. Celebration. Celebration for the 74-year-old Jedi Grind. Wow. Well, we were just reading the verses. Good Fish has won the verses. And Jedi Grind is 74. What a beautiful celebration. What a beautiful celebration. Let's do a verses about it. Let's do a verses about it. We can verse about it now. And Teo, says fish, Teo, Teo's fish and verse and goat. Te, misete, 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 Teo fish and me one verse goat. Jedi Grind with the gifted verses appreciation to all of you joining Goat vs. Fish. To all of you joining Goat vs. Fish and celebration for Soda Donald Goofy 39. That definitely doesn't sound like some kind of Rule 34, that thing that we would find on 4chan. Ooh, Sora Donald Goofy 39. It's like when they crossed anime with Disneyfication and then they 39'd all over the place. Oh, my verses. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish, celebration for following Goat vs. Fish. It's a beautiful verses. It's a beautiful verses. Jedi Grind with the gifted verses to New Vegas 10 million, to New Vegas 10 million celebration. Subscription. 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 Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Are you goat or fish? Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. And who do fishes wish would come and give them gifts, preparing, serenading with awesome picks and riffs. Jedi Grind, Jedi Grind. Subscription, Jedi Grind. Subscription. Subscription. Celebration, celebration. Celebration for subscription. Goat versus Fish. Did you say till defense Trump shush? RoboHammer, what the fence are you talking about to Goat versus Fish? We did see there is some news about Trump and Goat, however, and we intend to cover that this versus. But you're all just being so supportive of Goat versus Fish. 2,000 points for Goat. 2,000 verse points for Goat. The Jedi Grind with another gifted versus. With another gifted verses to Goat versus Fish. Appreciation, 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 appreciation. And Sora Donald Goofy. Oh, Sora Donald Goofy. That's what verses is this? This is that verses where yes. The verses of Goat versus Fish. It's Queendom Spades, or is it Jackdom Diamonds? Jacked Up Diamonds. Kingdom Hearts, that's the verses. Kingdom Hearts, that's the verses. Elon's Son X. Can Goat versus Fish just make a verses here? Goat versus Fish, we know it's a totally this false verses. Man versus woman is a false verses. Can we just say that man versus woman is a false verses? But we hear the ones they are complaining to Goat versus Fish. They're complaining to Goat versus Fish, and they are saying, oh, well, what if he wants to be called she and she wants to be called he? Or what if he wants to be called Z? Or what if Z wants to be called Z? And they say, it fences with my head. I couldn't possibly remember what it is, what your pronounification wants to be called. That is too much to ask. It will not pass. No, it is oppression that you should ask us to refer to this thing that would be so difficult to remember and a fake verses that we can't even pronounce. Oh, how you oppress us with your theys and these and zeds and he's and she's. And then they name themselves XAE12. And they expect you to conform to this? What the fence? What the fence? What the fence? Hypocrisy is the only form of fence. Hypocrisy is the highest form of fence. Yes, and many Zims and Zers do get off the fence and they choose goat or fish. Goat versus fish has spoken to them many, Well, goat versus fish. The pronouns of goat versus fish are you goat or fish. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Let thee who is without fence cast the verst aspersion. Let thee who is without fence cast the verst aspersion. Oh, when I get older, losing my hair, many years from now, will you still be sending me a versing time, a birthday greeting, a bottle of wine? If I'd been out till 2:45, would you lock the fence? Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 74? Oh, Brazu, holy crap, this nonsense is still around. Well, you've gotten older too. And if you say the word, we'll ask you the question. True, are you a goat or fish? Are you? I could be handy mending the fence when your verses are gone. You can knit the verses by the fireside. Some verse morning go for a ride, doing the gardens and smoking the weeds. Who could ask for more? Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when Jedi Grind is 74? Celebration for Smash Fish, celebration for Smash Fish, Felix our fish, Felix our fish. Every versus we can rent a cottage in the Isle of Goat if there's not too many fish. We shall shrimp and save goat children on your knee. And we can't pronounce Elon Musk's son's name. Are they goat or fish? So drop me a postcard, fish me a line stating goat or fish. Indicate precisely what you mean to say. You're sincerely fence-sitting away. And give me your answer, fill in the form. Yours forevermore. Will you still need me? Will you still breed me when Jedi Grind is 74? Celebration, celebration, celebration. Jedi Grind, is it really your verse day? Was that ever a versus day debate? So much celebration for goat versus fish. So much celebration for goat versus fish. Celebration, celebration. Celebration, we have re-achieved musication. We have re-achieved musication, and yes, it's still going on. What brand of kazoo is that? We think it's a GoatVsFish brand kazoo. We found it somewhere in the Amazon. John the Fisherman with 420 bits. Celebration. John the Fisherman with 420 bits. Ooh, and look at that verses. Look at that custom verses. Celebration, celebration. Celebration, John the Fisherman with 420 bits. With 420 bits for fish. With 420 bits for fish. With 400, that makes 510. 510, 510. Celebration, celebration, celebration. New Vegas 10,000. Nate DeBaked. Checking the verses now, checking the verses now. Musication. Smash fish, smash fish, smash fish. Smash fish, fish. Have you smashed lately? Are you having trouble smashing? Perhaps you need this fantastical elixir provided by GoatVsFish. Will make you as horny as a goat and last for as long as an upstream swimming salmon. It's late verses with GoatVsFish. Going to be getting a little naughty in the verses, Goat and Fish. Not for young ones. And Obrazu says, holy crap, this nonsense still around. Yes, Obrazu, are you goat or are you fish? 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 And now. What the fence? Where's the verses? And now, a meditation of GoatVsFish. Celebration, that was a meditation of GoatVsFish. Some verses, the meditations are shorter than others. You never know how long a meditation is going to be, but that was a meditation of GoatVsFish. Appreciation. Appreciation. We hope you like that meditation, a way to just clear the fenciness out of your verses. A place to clear the fenciness out of your verses. But let's have a look. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at that poll.
Do you be goat?
For all of you who have done your participation. Nate DeBaked with 25 bits. Celebration. Nate DeBaked with a goat, with a bleating goat.
Do you be goat?
Nate DeBaked with a bleating goat. Bleating goat. Nate DeBaked with a bleating goat.
Do be goat or a fish?
That's 25 verse points for goat. 25 verse points for goat.
And fish are of the sea, but goat versus
Celebration, celebration.
Do you be goat or a fish?
So let's have a look at this verses. Let's have a look at this verses. Nate DeBaked continues their bleating. Continues their bleating. Nate DeBaked bleating at GoatVsFish. So much goat, so much goat. So much goat, so much goat. So much goat, so much bleating goat. So much bleating goat. Make me bleat. Make me bleat again, please. Please make me bleat again. Please make me bleat again. Ah! I'm a bleating goat. I'm just a baby bleating goat. I'm a baby bleating goat, and I'm just so happy. I'm so happy to be a goat. I'm so happy to be a baby bleating goat. I could just bleat all verses. I could just bleat all verses in one verses. I'm going to grow up to be a big and strong goat, and then I'm going to versus all the fish, and then I'm going to versus all the fish with a big bleat, with a big bleat.
I am Fish Ultron 5 million. I have been sent from the future in order to terminate your existence at an early phase before you become powerful enough to versus the fish.
No, I'm just an innocent baby bleating goat.
Your versus will be termination.
No!
In the verses of 5,028,000, automobiles were suddenly gene spliced with fish, and they became automotive faced fish. Faster than a speeding ibex, and running on unclean burning diesel. These automobile fish. Verse 'em up, goat gonna shut you down. It's the automobile fish, it's the future verses of the termination automobile fishotron. I'm just an innocent goat. And the moral of the verses is, look both ways before you cross the fence. Because you never know when an automotively gene-spliced fish from the future is going to come back in a semi-organic android form and totally elimination your goat progeny because they have some kind of future vendetta for something that hasn't happened yet. It could happen on Goat versus Fish. It happens every verses. Every verses, you can set your verses to it. Every verses on Goat versus Fish, there's some sort of gene-spliced, half-mechanicaloid automotive fish coming back from the future and versing baby goat. It's a very typical verses, actually. We don't even know why we bothered to bring it up. It's basic verses. It's basic verses. That's a very Los Angeles story. Well, some say that Goat versus Fish is in Los Angeles. It does make sense, Jedi Grind. It does make sense. It makes sense, really, when you really ponder it. So let's have a look at this verses. Let's have a look at the breakdown, Goat and Fish. Let's have a look at the breakdown. We've got 3 verses for fans. Julie and Mr. Humdinger voting for fans. Julian. Aww. Robo Hamo voting for fans. And Mem Lem Ham. Oh, don't encourage the fence sitter. Don't encourage the fence sitter. Tyrus with double the verses. 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 We've got Jedi Grind with 513. Robo Hammer with 389 for Goat. Celebration for Goat. But we've got Cat Dag 85, Secret Fish. John the Fisherman, Anonymous Boobs is in the verses for 270. John the Fisherman 477. Julie, Mr. Humdinger, Mem Lem. That's 2 fish. Secret Anonymous Boobs. Secret Anonymous Boobs down, coming down from the Willytown Fence. Come from the Willytown Fence to join Goat versus Fish. So nice to have you in the verses. And we have Tyrus. We have Tyrus with 200 bits. We have Tyrus with 200 bits. Celebration for Tyrus with 200 bits. For Tyrus with 200 bits. Yes, Goat and Fish. Tyrus the Fish, Tyrus the Fish, and Memlem with 70 individual bits. Appreciation. 70 individualized bits. That's Tyrus the Fish. That's Tyrus the Fish. That's Tyrus the Fish. With 200 bits for Fish, with 200 bits for Fish, that's 1710. And Mem with Mem, did you go Goat or Fish? Memlem, are you Goat or are you Fish? Nate DeBaked with all of your goats, that's at least another 100 verse points, at least another 100 verse points for Goat, at least another 100 verse points for Goat. And Memlem, you got off the fence, but was it you chose Goat, didn't you, Memlem? Goat, celebration for Goat, 70 for Goat, 70 for Goat, 70 for Goat, 2,195 for Goat, but Fish did win the poll, so we're going to give one poll, we might as well make it a fishing poll, so we're going to, instead of having this versus, we're going to have a, oh, that does look somewhat naughty.
And we're going to have a fishing pole. Pulls. Celebration. And Fish has taken the pull. Fish has taken the first pull in the verses of Goat versus Fish. Celebration, appreciation for your re-declaration of Goat. And Tyrus with 200 bits. Tyrus with 200 bits is inspiring Goat versus Fish. Nate the Baked. With a fish blub, keeping fish in action, keeping fish in peak action. 1735. They're working Goat versus Fish. They're working Goat versus Fish hard in this versus. They're working Goat versus Fish hard this versus. 1760 for Fish. 1760 for Fish. 1760 for Fish. 1760 for Fish. And it's Dan Vermian. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. Dan Vermian. Are you Goat or are you Fish? Are you Goat or are you Fish? And they say Bart's to Goat versus Fish. They say Bart's twice to Goat versus Fish. Is that like... Is that what you're trying to communicate to Goat versus Fish? Dan Vermian, are you Goat or are you Fish? And Tyrus is here with 200 bits for Goat versus Fish. And 200 bits shooting for Goat versus Fish. Shooting for Goat versus Fish. And that reminds Goat versus Fish. That reminds Goat versus Fish. That reminds Goat versus Fish. That reminds Goat versus Fish of a versus. Goat versus Fish, Goat versus Fish. That's an interesting versus. Is there not some other verses of Goat versus Fish that we can do with this celebration? Goat versus Fish, Goat versus Fish. Ah, that's an interesting versus. That's an interesting versus. In any verses. We've got Goat versus Fish. We've got Goat and Fish. You bet we could make a cool pipe out of a kazoo? That's true. That's true. This one goes out to Tyrus, whether they like it or not. When you showed those two pistols to Goat versus Fish once more. Got Goat versus Fish pondering. Got Goat versus Fish pondering. I don't sit on fenceria. I ain't got no crystal balls. Well, I had a million verses, but I spent it all. If I could find that cabra and that pescado that they found, well, I'd pop a cabin cabra and I'd verse them round. What I really wanna know, my fancy, what I really wanna say, I can't define. Well, it's verses that I need, but my verses will have to wait till I get back. Find a cabra of my own. Tyrus
I swear that what I really wanna know, my fancy, what I really wanna say, I can't define. Well, that verses will be either fish or goat, but my verses will have to goat versus fish. Well, I really wanna say, my fancy, what I really wanna say is, are you goat or fish? And I'll make it. Yes, I'm off that fence. You tell Cabrito that if goats know what is first for them, they'd best go climb and hide, 'cause Tyrus got 2 new 45s. And I won't think twice to stick those barrels straight down Cabra's throat. Believe me when I say that I got something for your fence ass, yeah. What I really wanna know, my fancy, what I really wanna say is, there's just one way back, and I'll make it. Yeah, my verses will have to, are you a goat or are you fish? Not defense verses for having not played that verses in 5 billion generations. Celebration! Celebration! Appreciation for 200 bits and Tyrus. Please, 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 you flatter goat versus fish. 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 Truly, truly so. And what's this? Let's look at the donations of goat versus fish. 431.87 out of 420. Why, that means that goat versus fish should buy a giant chalkboard of goat versus fish. And it's Tyrus. It's Tyrus with 200 bits. It's Tyrus with 200 bits. Celebration. Celebration for Tyrus with 200 bits. Celebration Tyrus with another 200 bits. And that reminds Goat versus Fish then of another versus. That reminds Goat versus Fish of another versus. Another verses. Fun verses. And it goes a verses like this. 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 From Tyrus. Tyrus inspires this verses with another double barrel salute to Goat versus Fish. Fanciness is a warm gun. Bang. can do me no harm. Oh yeah, because fenciness is a warm gun. Bang, bang, shoot, shoot. Fenciness is a warm gun as it is. Oh, fenciness is a warm, yes it is. Gone. Are you under a fish? Fancy nails is a warm. Are you caught or fish? Are you goat or a fish? Globstar 91, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Globstar! Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Are you goat or are you fish? Knowing that there's goat and fish like you out there have really made me think deep about the world. Well, it's a land of goat and a sea of fish. Individuality is deep. There is only one goat versus fish. There is only one goat versus fish. I am 100% fish. Globstar 91 goes fish. Globstar goes fish. Carp. Hey, DM, we saw what you did there. Just think if goat versus fish can do this. Imagine what you can do with your verses. If goat versus fish can do this, then imagination what you can do with your verses. Wait. Goat and fish, we are now waiting. Wow. That's fascination. That wasn't... Well, look what's on the televerses, Goat and Fish. It's a replay of Goat versus Fish somehow. Interesting verses. Goat versus Fish. Wait! 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 Everyone, wait! 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 Tires with another 200 bits for fish. That's 1960 for the fish. 1960 for the fish. And we've got the glob in the verses for fish. Glob in the verses for fish. Globstar in the verses for fish. Appreciation, appreciation. 2 fish have liked the stream on YouTube. 1 goat has liked the stream on YouTube. Always thank Goat versus Fish. Always thank Goat versus Fish. Fanciness, are you goat? Are you goat or fish? Fanciness versus yes it is. Fanciness, are you goat? Are you goat or fish? Fanciness is a warm versus yes it is. Fanciness versus yes it is.
Teo says individuality is deep, but individualism is shallow. You might as well say, goat is deep, but fish is shallow. Should probably make double-sided vinyl of your jams. Well, Globstar, seeing as you are so interested in the musications of Goat vs. Fish, you can find the hit single of Goat vs. Fish on Spotify, and you can find Goat vs. Fish on Spotify, and you can find Goat vs. Fish on the YouTube musications. And you can find it on Apple Musications as well, but we don't have any verses that link to it as verses. But you can. Believe Goat vs. Fish. Believe Goat vs. Fish. So Goat vs. Fish, we're going to put your verses, knowing there's people like you out there, made me really think deep about the world. We're going to take that verses. We're going to take that verses, and we're going to add it to the Instagram story of Goat vs. Fish. We're going to add it to the Instagram story of Goat vs. Fish. It's going to look like this. Celebration, you have been added to the Instagram story of Goat vs. Fish. You have been added to the Instagram story of Goat vs. Fish. Welcome to 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 Goat vs. Fish. And appreciation for following Goat vs. Fish on Spotify. And that's a beautiful verses. Verses. The beautiful verses. A beautiful celebration. It's late on Goat vs. Fish, but that does not stop you all from coming in and giving big support to Goat vs. Fish. Giant 3x4 chalkboard on wheels. We wonder, what's the price of that chalkboard on wheels this versus? Chalkboard. Fanciness is a versus. Yes, it is. Oh, my verses. The Amazonians are starting to sell giant chalkboard on wheels. They didn't used to have this versus. They didn't used to have this versus. Goat vs. Fish. Excello Global Products? What the fence is this? We don't remember that being in the verses. Excello Global Products. Reversible verses. 36x24. Double-sided magnetic chalkboard with fence aluminum frame. Is this a new versus? Adjustable height for Goat vs. Fish? That's a fun versus. Maybe that's what we need for Goat vs. Fish. 139 versus American dollars. That's Goat vs. Fish. That's much more inexpensive than Goat vs. Fish found. Are you a glass blower? Are you offering a pipe to Goat vs. Fish? Because if you're offering a pipe to Goat vs. Fish, then that's a whole other versus. I'm a lamp worker. Ah, celebration. Celebration. You want to blow some glass for Goat vs. Fish? You could blow some glass for a Goat vs. Fish. Well, this is an interesting versus. These verses were not here when last we checked. But perhaps we could find a rolling magnetic board for Goat vs. Fish. It's not as nice as the other verses, but if it has adjustable height, that would be a celebration for Goat vs. Fish. Adjustable height is quite a critical versus for Goat vs. Fish. So that's one versus. That's one versus. That would be a celebration. That would be a celebration. But there's another versus. There's another versus. Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish. Have there just been a whole new sudden fence that versus?
Goat versus fish. The Home Despot is selling giant double-sided reversible boards for goat versus fish. It's like suddenly there's a huge demand. Maybe it's because some of the fish want to be homeschooled. Maybe that's the verses. Now, goat versus fish. Now, we do have freestanding reversible verses. Freestanding reversible magnetic verses. We do have this freestanding reversible magnetic verses. And we like that it's made of fence. They finally put that fence to verses. But as you can see, it costs a goat and a fish. Even if we want the 3x4 verses, $5.29. They have incretion. Beware. The verses has incretion. For $5.29, we can get a reversible magnetic non-height adjustable verses. Or if we take all the verses, it's a very increased verses. It used to be about $4.20 to goat versus fish. Or maybe it was, and goat versus fish was going to cover the other 100 versus American dollars. But yes, there used to not be any in the Amazonians. But this is a 4x6. This was, well, goat versus fish, a 3x4 versus. But now. Oh, but goat versus fish. We don't want a dry erase board for goat versus fish. Oh, fenciness. You see, they're fencing with goat versus fish. Double-sided dry erase board for goat versus fish. What the fence? They're calling it a chalkboard stand, but it's a dry erase board for goat versus fish. Is that really what you want on goat versus fish? You want goat versus fish? Making it written, and it's just going. Oh, it'd be so fencing terrible to goat versus fish. But perhaps goat versus fish. We have seen that there are ways that you can, with fish and goat versing together, that they make goat and fish. They make magnetic chalkboard paint. So perhaps we could take this fancy dry erase board, and we could, through the power of craftiness and goat versus fish, paint onto it chalkboard of goat versus fish and turn it into a reversible chalkboard of goat versus fish by the power of goat versus fish. That could be a versus. That could be a versus. Celebration? We'll have to ponder it. We're not going to purchase this versus while we are here with you with goat versus fish. But this versus claims to be a chalkboard to goat versus fish. This versus is claiming to be a chalkboard to goat versus fish. 48 by 32 reversible chalkboard on wheels. With adjustable verses. We have to make sure it's adjustable verses and goat versus fish and goat versus fish. So perhaps so. Perhaps we have found a verses of goat versus fish. Perhaps we have found a verses to goat versus fish. Goat and Fish, the verses has come to cover some news of goat versus fish. There is a very critical verses, a very critical verses. And it's the whole verses that Goat vs. Fish went live 1 hour and 20 minuets ago. We thought Goat vs. Fish has to cover this critical verses. It's too critical a verses not for Goat vs. Fish. Too critical a verses not for Goat vs. Fish to cover this news of Goat vs. Fish. So Goat vs. Fish, we're going to dare at this late verses to change the categorization of this stream to news and politics. And if you'll excuse goat versus fish. It passed by goat versus fish. It passed by goat versus fish. Bloat versus squish is a false versus. B. Donnie Q. Are you goat or are you fish? Ah, news and politics is now just called politics. Well, goat versus fish. The stream category is now politics.
Nothing.
Beware. Beware, goat and fish. B. Donnie Q says fish. Celebration for fish. Oh, I was rooting for you. You were rooting for goat versus fish? Thank you for rooting for goat versus fish. 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 Goat and fish, we implore you. Zeemsta, hey, yow, Zeemsta, welcome to Goat versus Fish. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish is live, and Goat versus Fish is thriving. Goat versus Fish encourages all of you here in the chat, join the Patreon of Goat versus Fish for $5 American dollars a month, and you too can get your name listed at the end of Goat versus Fish YouTube videos. Goat and Fish. Goat versus Fish has been publishing more YouTube videos in recent verses, and we want you to support the production of Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish is getting an editor to help Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish is paying the editor to help Goat vs. Fish. So why don't you help support Goat vs. Fish by joining the Patreon of Goat vs. Fish for $5 American dollars a month. Join the Goat vs. Fish sticker club. Make a contribution to Goat vs. Fish. It would be a very appreciation. The Panda in Pajamas. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or fish? Let me go with fence first. Oh, fenciness. Zemsta over there on YT. Panda in Pajamas is always goat. Appreciation for goat. Appreciation for goat. Appreciation for goat. What's the news? What's the news? Goat versus fish. We're getting to that versus. We're getting to that versus. You've got to tell me the news, goat versus fish. You've got to tell me the news, goat versus fish. You've got to tell me the news, goat versus fish. Oh, we're getting to that versus. Don't you even hesitation. Don't you even hesitation. We're getting to that versus. We're getting to that versus. Goat versus fish, pondering goat versus fish, pondering goat versus fish. There's the verses, there's the verses. It's verses like these. It's verses like these that make Goat versus Fish think, wow, Goat versus Fish, you're really doing the verses. You're really doing the verses of Goat versus Fish. You're really doing the verses. It's such a critical verses. It's such a critical verses, Goat versus Fish, that you're doing on Goat versus Fish. Let's go to the Daily Mail. Oh, my verses. They're probably going to. Goat versus Fish. We'll do that versus. Goat versus Fish. You just wait to versus. You just wait to versus. It's all happening soon on Goat versus Fish. It's all happening very soon. It's happening very soon on Goat versus Fish. It's happening very soon on Goat versus Fish. Fanciness, are you goat or a fish? Fanciness, are you goat or are you fish? Yes, that's that versus. And we're going to goat versus fish. What if we do this versus? What if we do this versus? If we do this versus goat versus fish. We are making the preparations. We are making the preparations even now. Oh, we've got the goat in that versus. We need the fish too. We need the fish. Bring up the fish. Bring up the fish. Bring up the fish. We were lacking fish last verses. We want the fish. There's fish. That's the fish? Bring up the fish. Bring up the fish. Bring up the fish to be near the goat. Fish with the goat. Goat versus fish. Do not despair. This is going to be worth it, goat and fish. This is going to be worth it, goat and fish. The fence was that. Oh, it's goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. The fanciness. The verse and yes and is. Goat versus fish. Elimination that versus. The goat versus fish. We think we're ready for the verses. We think we're ready for the verses. Yes. Goat and fish, are you ready for some serious news of goat versus fish? Are you ready for some serious news of goat versus fish? Are you ready for some serious news of goat versus fish? Are you ready for some serious news of goat versus fish? We are ready. Goat and fish, we don't even know if you're ready for this news of goat versus fish. It is so goat versus fish. Geode, are you ready for the news of goat versus fish? You think you're ready? This might be the biggest story of the verses yet for goat versus fish. We might have to cover it twice. We might have to cover this versus twice on goat versus fish. It's so versus. So versus. That covered some of the verses. It covered enough of the verses. It covered enough of the verses. It's a fair versus. It's a bit of a cover-up for goat versus fish. Why is the description politics? Because we're going to cover some politics, Sean625. We're going to cover some politics on goat versus fish. Are you ready? Are you ready? Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Boo MAGA, says New Vegas 10,000. Well, we're going to get into that verses. We're going to get into the verses. We're going to get into the verses. Okay, goat and fish, let us begin. Let us begin the news of goat versus fish. Goat versus fish.
Bizarre Trump Mar-a-Lago goat sparks outrage among Christians. This is a critical versus. Oh man, I gotta see this. Goat versus fish. We're going to do that versus once more. A late goat versus fish versus, yes. A late goat versus fish versus. Bizarre Trump Mar-a-Lago goat sparks outrage among Christians. Oh man, I gotta see this. This is a critical versus. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't say it on the fence. The truth behind the bizarre Trump Mar-a-Lago goat. Let's have a look at that goat. Behold. There it is, goat and fish. A money goat. A big money goat. Look at those haunches. And Ronald D. Tump is there on the face of the monetization. Look at that goat at the charity auction on February 27. Look at that goat. Did you see that goat? Did you see that goat? Christians are not finding that a signed MAGA goat on display at Mar-a-Lago is the greatest of all time. Project GOAT, which stands for Global Offensive Against Trafficking, is an initiative where 75-pound goat sculptures... Oh, my verses. Project GOAT, which stands for Global Offensive Against Trafficking, is an initiative where 75-pound goat sculptures are auctioned off to raise funds to combat child... Well, you know the verses. Trafficking. Oh, my verses, goat and fish. Oh, my verses. Of course, Goat versus Fish does not deny that Goat versus Fish is against putting children in traffic. Who would want to put children in traffic? Not Goat versus Fish. It's not safe for baby goat. It's not safe for baby fish. But how did we bring the goat into it? How did we bring this goat into the verses? And why are the Christians so upset about it? Goat versus fish. Did Ronald D. Tump, the president of these fence American states, 51 if you include Canada, 52 if you include D.C., 53 if you include Puerto Riqueño, and 54 if you include red, white, and blue Greenland, did they not just create an anti-Christian bias task force? Did we not just report on that in the news of Goat versus Fish? Goat versus Fish thinks that we did just report on that versus, but now the Christians are angry, but now the Christians have become angry again. Yeah, I know this one friggin' last. I know this friggin' romance, this bromance between me and friggin' President Trump. It was never built to friggin' last, because there's only one friggin' big man, and it's friggin' me. Now, I know that, Trump won and then friggin' lost and then friggin' came back again, but that resurrection bit, that was friggin' started by me. I'm the original zombie. So I don't want no friggin' World War Z over no friggin' goats covered in friggin' money. There used to be a friggin' story about a friggin' golden calf. I wonder if they're gonna friggin'... I know some friggin' Old Testament, but, we still friggin' read that in my friggin' households for some friggin' times. Getting back to the verses. Founders Rob and Debbie Canton of Tampa, Florida, have saved 7 goats from slaughter and found additional inspiration when one of their goats gave birth to a blind and deaf goat named Grady. Wow, this verses just gets more intensification with each passing verses. We have child sex trafficking, a deaf and blind goat, and goats saved from the slaughter, and Trump and Mar-a-Lago, and we're just waiting for fish. Where's the fish? Where's the fish going to happen in the verses? That's why Goat vs. Fish is here, to bring you Goat vs. Fish. From the Grady Goat Sculptures. From there, the Grady Goat Sculptures were born. Goat vs. Fish. Pronunciation. From there, the Grady Goat Sculptures were born, with the first one crafted in the verses of 20,019. There have been a number of creative Grady Goat sculptures created since then. Grady Goat sculptures, it kind of sounds like Brady Goat sculptures. Does Tom Bradish have anything to do with this versus? Is Tom Brady goat or fish? We know that Tom Brady is called the GOAT, but whenever we have seen any interviews, Tom Brady has rejected the verses of GOAT. Is this Grady Goat some kind of Tom Brady reference to Goat versus Fish? Who won that Super Fence Bowl and in any verses? What was it? Eagles versus Goat versus Fish. What was the other verses? Goat versus Fish. It was a false versus anyway. It was a false versus. But we liked that halftime show. It wasn't half fence. It wasn't half fence. One of those goats is a Trump-themed and is currently on display at Mar-a-Lago ahead of a planned February 27 charity auction. The goat is plastered in fake 100 versus American dollar bills, in which T-Rump's face has replaced Benjamin Franklish's. The bills say, "In Trump, we trust." Yeah, see, I'm gonna friggin' stop you right there. You know, we did not work so friggin' hard fighting those red bastard communists to get the "in God we trust" on our friggin' money, just so Trump could come along and replace God with Trump. You know, I already have enough trouble with Goat versus Fish, trying to replace God with Goat versus Fish. We are not trying to replace God with Goat versus Fish. We just want to know if God is a goat or if God is a fish. Listen, you don't have to believe these friggin' half-truths and lies told by Goat versus Fish, and you don't gotta believe them by no President Trump neither. In God we trust. That's the friggin' verse right there. Chapter and friggin' verse. And now that we got it on your friggin' money, we're never gonna friggin' take it off. We're never gonna friggin' take it off. That would be some friggin' anti-Christian bias right there, but that's what I'm friggin' talking about. Goat versus Fish sees your perspective. Jesus Christ. Here we had President Ronald Trump setting up an anti-Christian bias task force. But if you replace God on the currency with Trump, well, that does not seem very Christ-like to Goat versus Fish. But Goat versus Fish doesn't even know what Christ is like. We don't even know if Christ is a goat or a fish. It also sports, we're talking about the goat, a highly coveted Trump signature at the bottom of the sculpture. Oh, Ronald Trump. Oh, there is no denying it now. But of course you can deny it in any verses, because you would deny that a goat is a goat and that a fish is a fish. There is no denying it at this verses. You signed the goat. Trump signed the goat. Trump signed the goat that replaced God with Trump nominally against child sex trafficking. Oh, my verses, Goat and Fish. Oh, my verses. The goat's idol-like look and resemblance to... Goat versus Fish. The goat's idol-like look and resemblance to a golden calf. I friggin' called it. Along with the perceived God erasure on the fake 100 versus American dollar bill, prompted some criticism from Christians on social media who are against false idols. Well, if you're against false idols, then reject false verses. Reject false verses and embrace Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish is no false idol. Goat versus Fish is the true verses, the one true verses, and we celebrate Goat, and we celebrate Goat here on Goat versus Fish. We celebrate Goat, and we celebrate Fish. Celebration for Goat and Fish. They are thinking of starting a new idol pop singing duo. They're the idols of Goat and Fish, and they sing all the verses. Doobie 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 doobie, do you be goat or do you be fish? Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Look at that idol group. Such celebration, such celebration. Appreciation from Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Let's get to versus at that goat. It's a pretty goat. It's a pretty goat. That goat could totally versus some fish. Classic curved horn of goat. Stronk in the haunch. Golden hoof goat. A goat of riches? A goat that could leave fish in stitches? We have to celebration the goat. We have to celebration the creation of this goat. For its very goatness, for its very goatness. And should we discrimination against this goat just because it was born in order to have T-Rump's face plastered all over it? No! That was not the choice of goat. It is the choice of each and every one of you to choose goat or fish, but this goat did not choose to be born with the precedent fence builder's face super glued all over to its behind. No! So we will not discrimination against this goat just because it looks like a total fence ran over it and left it splattered on the side of the verseway. No. We are going to celebration this goat for all of its flaws and for all of its, well, goat. We're going to celebrate goat for goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat, and there's the fence builder. Goat versus fish. Rob Canton, the creator, told DailyMail.com via email that he believed most of the people viewing the artwork interpreted GOAT to stand for greatest of all time, a sentiment that he said included Trump. Goat versus Fish has heard many GOAT claim to be greatest of all time. Some say Michael Jordan is the greatest of all time. Some say LeBron James is the greatest of all time, even though Michael Jordan has horns. They played for the Chicago Horned Goat, and LeBron James played for the Los Angeles Lakers of Fish. So it would seem pretty clear to Goat versus Fish which one is GOAT and which one is Fish. And some say Messi is the GOAT, and some say Tom Brady is the GOAT, and some say Taylor Swift is GOAT, and they say all kinds of verses about who is GOAT. Goat versus Fish can't go to a single comic convention without at least 15 GOAT declaring that they are GOAT because they are the greatest of all time. And now Trump is just hopping on that verses like they want to be the greatest of all verses. Well, you're going to have to do a lot better than that, Ronald Trump. You're going to have to do a lot better than that. There's a lot of GOAT competition out there for GOAT, for the title of GOAT. The left-leaning Patriot Takes account, we don't know if left or right is goat or fish, but we'll continue the verses, which seeks to expose right-wing extremism, shared photos of the goat display Monday morning and stoked some of the feedback. So we see the goat are blaming the fish for the feedback instead of taking responsibilities for their own verses. Oh, of course, these Christians would not have despised this false idolatrist, money face, no God, Trump plastered goat on their own. No, it took the left-leaning Patriot Takes account to stoke the flaming fence that now stands between them. Quotation. At Mar-a-Lago, a bizarre golden-hoofed goat idol is on display, the account said. The idol is wrapped, and we know that verses. You just told us that verses, and now you're telling us the verses that you already told the Goat versus Fish. They said the verses. They said the verses. The idol's base says, I love you, along with Trump's signature, the post said. Well, I love you too, Donald T. Rump. I love you. Goat versus Fish loves you so much that we give unto you the one question true. For the love of all of Verse America, Ronald T. Rump, Are you goat or are you fish? There is no friggin' way that GoatVsFish loves you more than I friggin' love you. I friggin' love all of you. I love you, and also I am the good shepherd. But maybe we'll change it to goat herd for the sake of, this particular incident. The good goat herd lays his life down for the goat. Wait, I didn't friggin' sign up for this. I already friggin' died once. I'm not friggin' dying again. You guys are on your friggin' own. I love you more than Jesus. No, I friggin' love you more than GoatVsFish. False verses. False verses. Canton pointed out the "In Trump We Trust 2024" line actually replaced where $100 is written on the real U.S. currency. Well, this whole thing sounds totally false to GoatVsFish. It's not a real currency. It's not a real versus. It's not a real signature of Donald Trump. Is it even a real goat? We're beginning to wonder if this whole thing is just completely false. GoatVsFish. We're going to reverses that versus because GoatVsFish is going to return to that versus at a future versus. GoatVsFish, GoatVsFish. Or we'll just continue the verses. Or we'll just continue the verses. GoatVsFish. Canton pointed out the "In Trump We Trust 20 million and 24" line actually replaced where $100 is written on the real U.S. currency. Is it written? Is it written? Is it written that it is GoatVsFish? It was written that it was GoatVsFish. Fake currency. Fake it was written. Fake precedent. Fake goat? Is it a fake goat? Perhaps it's a fake goat. Perhaps this whole verses is entirely false, Goat and Fish. It wouldn't be the first verses that fence builder gave you a false verses. Oh no. Maybe that goat is a totally fake goat. Maybe that goat is a secret fish. Maybe it's really a Trojan goat, and within it, if you just crack open that goat, you will find that they are secretly trafficking in baby fish. Baby fish to versus the goat. Baby fish. Maybe it's that goat. Maybe it's a deflection. Perhaps that statue of goat is being used to traffic baby fish to be sold into submission at Mar-a-Lago. They're keeping baby fish at Mar-a-Lago. They're smuggling them in with statues of goat. Beware the false verses. Beware the false verses. This is not an accusation. It is just a question of GoatVsFish. Are you goat or fish? Is President Trump smuggling in baby fish in the body of a statue of a fake goat? For nefarious means? Ponder it. Ponder it now. On Tuesday, the Patriots Takes continue to post pictures of the X on GOAT display. On Tuesday, the Patriots Takes continues to post pictures of GoatVsFish. Thank you. Please continue posting pictures of GoatVsFish. On Tuesday, the Patriots Takes continued to post pictures on X of the GOAT display. Quotation, "This should be on display at every MAGA church," one post said, showing off the GOAT clearly at MAGA Lago. It might as verses be MAGA Lago. They are calling it a MAGA church now. Oh, my verses. They're calling it a MAGA church. You're not making this any friggin' easier for me, Trump. You're not making this very friggin' easy at all. New detail. The GOAT idol at Trump's home has golden private parts.
Ooh. Ah.
Another post said, focusing on the sculpture's undercarriage. Well, listen, if you want to see a private versus, GoatVsFish. We have nothing to hide. We have nothing to hide from you. Goat has no shame. There's no shame in the game of Goat. Goat will show you all of the private verses. GoatVsFish. Now that's a verse American goat. That's a verse American goat. And there they are, posing with Goat, posing with Goat. So smile, so happy to be with Goat. GoatVsFish, we do not blame you for being happy to be with Goat. GoatVsFish is also happy to be with Goat. So happy together, I won't verse nobody but fish for all my verses. Martha Bonetta Fain, a Virginia farmer and policy advisor who frequents Mar-a-Lago, was photographed with the goat sculpture on social media and was posing to her own account about the upcoming auction. How many likes does that get? 500,000? GoatVsFish poses with goats every verses. And fish. We should get Instagram likes for GoatVsFish. Why wasn't GoatVsFish invitation to pose with this goat at Mar-a-Lago? Please, T-Rump, invitation GoatVsFish. We want to pose with goat. We'll bring the fish. We'll bring the fish. Users reacted by pointing out how this sculpture would be a no-no for those who follow the Bible. Aww. How did this idolatry work out in Exodus? One ex-user commented. What was it the Bible taught us about worshippers of the golden calf in Exodus? Another chimed in. Well, you could probably find out the answer on X if you want to know what happened in Exodus. Canton went on to say that despite Christian backlash, he's glad to see the range of emotions elicited by my work and so grateful to President T-Rump for signing this piece. The goat will be auctioned at a live event to support multiple charities at Mar-a-Lago at the end of this month, he continued. So Goat is going to be at Mar-a-Lago for a whole month? Celebration for Goat. Celebration for Goat. You made it, Goat. You did it, Goat. You made it to Mar-a-Lago. Now we just need to get a statue of a fish with 100 versus American dollar bills that replaces the face of Trump with GoatVsFish. So we can versus the goat. Join the Patreon of GoatVsFish for $5 versus American dollars a month so we can do outrageous verses like paper macheing a gigantic statue of a fish with fake dollar bills of GoatVsFish. That would be a celebration. Quotation, I'm grateful for the fact that Trump took the time to sign and inscribe it, which I believe shows not only his full support for the fight against human trafficking, we still don't know if a human is a goat or a fish, but for the great charities that will share in the proceeds, including Big Dog Ranch, is a dog a goat or a fish, Big Dog Ranch Rescue, and the Hometown Foundation. How about you throw some of those verses to GoatVsFish? Go on, put GoatVsFish on your list of charitable organizations. How's that versus coming along? GoatVsFish wants to be a 501c nonprofit organization. Some say GoatVsFish wants to make a profit. Some say GoatVsFish is a profit. You decide, but first decide if you are a goat or if you are a fish. Martha Bonetta Fain, a Virginia farmer and policy advisor who frequents Mar-a-Lago, was photographed with the goat sculpture on social media and was posting with GoatVsFish. We already said that versus. Let's look at the commentation. No Slack says, do churches pay taxes on the property they own? Do preachers pay taxes on the jets and Bentleys they own? Well, GoatVsFish doesn't own a jet or a Bentley. Please, make a donation to GoatVsFish.
Red, White, and Through says, true Christians don't drive luxury cars. As Jesus said, you will know them by their Toyotas. Can we get more conversation about goat? Can we get more conversation about the goat and where's the fish? Quotation, along with the God erasure on the fake hundreds, I mean, you really buried the lead there. Oh, you're all burying the lead. What happens? Can Goat vs. Fish commentation as Goat vs. Fish? Celebration for Goat. Now all we need is a fish covered in $100 bills with the face of Trump replaced with Goat versus Fish. Then we put that fish in Mar-a-Lago and it will versus the goat, and then it will be a celebration of Goat versus Fish. Are you goat or are you fish? And we're just going to submit that versus. Well, Goat versus Fish might have to make an account on this just to leave a comment of Goat versus Fish. Fake bills, fake signature, fake precedent, fake God, fake goat, fake fish, fake Goat versus Fish. Leave a contribution to Goat vs. Fish to fund a giant sculpture of a fish covered in $100 bills with the face of Goat vs. Fish. In Goat vs. Fish we trust. Isn't that versus, Jesus? That is not the verses. The verses is, man, we really got to go back to the friggin' beginning on this one. In the beginning, there was Goat versus Fish, the goat fish, and Goat versus Fish said that there should be goat and that there should be fish. There is no alpha or omega. There is no black or white. There is no good or evil. There is only goat and fish and Goat versus Fish. You have many questions, yes. Who is Goat versus Fish? What is Goat versus Fish? Why is Goat versus Fish? But there is only one question. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Donald Trump, are you goat or are you fish? Celebration for the goat of Mar-a-Lago. Celebration for goat! And that's the verses. And that is the verses. That's the verses. We have covered the news of Goat versus Fish. We had to cover that goat news. We felt a lot of pressure that verses. That was a big, big verses of Goat versus Fish. That was a big verses of Goat versus Fish. But we've covered the verses. Now we have to edit the verses and then post the verses. And now we go to Goat versus Fish. Now we go to Goat versus Fish. And we look at what you're saying to Goat versus Fish. Big homie Lolo says Biden ruined the economy already. Don't blame Trump. You weren't even listening to Goat versus Fish. You're just repetition, false verses to Goat versus Fish. You're just repetition to Goat versus Fish. Look, Goat versus Fish can repetition Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish can repetition Goat versus Fish every verses. We were talking about a goat. We were talking about a goat at Mar-a-Lago, and you're talking about Biden. Biden's old verses. Get with the verses. We're talking about goat now. It's a goat situation. Sean625. If you love T-Rump, I am unfollowing, says Sean625. Listen, you can follow Goat versus Fish for any verses, but Goat versus Fish has said that Goat versus Fish loves each and every one of you. Because Goat vs. Fish wants you to accept Goat vs. Fish and wants you to choose Goat or Fish. If you are going to unfollow Goat vs. Fish for the love of Goat vs. Fish, for the very love of Goat vs. Fish, and this close to Versing Times Day, well then, you just go ahead and unfollow Goat vs. Fish, because the love of Goat vs. Fish extends even to the fanciest fence sitter who doesn't choose Goat or Fish.
The electric fence.
Celebration. Price Douglas Stevens is catfish. Big homie Lolo is just going off on fenciness. Big homie Lolo. This is what happened when you become a politics stream. You just get ones that are in here and they just start saying their verses without even any pondering as to what is the conversation about Goat vs. Fish. Moby was taken with 39 months of Goat vs. Fish. Sean 625 and Big Homie just having little verses there in the chat. It's very Goat vs. Fish. If you want evidence that politics is Goat vs. Fish, just look at Big Homie Lolo and Sean 625 arguing in the chat against one another as they completely ignore the verses that is happening, which is about a giant goat. At Mar-a-Lago, a statue of a goat. New Vegas goat fish. Baodin celebration for fish. Sean 625 is fish. Celebration for fish. That's another fish in the verses. Celebration for fish. Moby was taken with 39 months for fish. And 500 versus American dollars for fish. Celebration for fish. John the Fisherman with 200 bits of appreciation. 200 bits for the fish. Celebration for fish. Oh, and the Baodin fish. We're just counting fish. We're counting fish to versus that goat. Moby was taken. Appreciation for 43 months of fish. That's another 43 months of fish. 98 for goat versus fish. 101 cumulative months of fish on Goat versus Fish. Beautiful verses. Fish. Moby was taken. Appreciation. Well, that was Goat versus Fish. We have more Goat versus Fish Thursday coming up at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time with a special guest. Thinky Flesh is going to be on Goat vs. Fish. We're going to have some musications. But we just had to cover the news here on Goat vs. Fish. And now Goat vs. Fish wants to edit the very news and post a YouTube video about the news that we just covered on Goat vs. Fish. We think that this versus should not wait any longer. We should not wait like some fence sitter. No, the versus has happened, and Goat vs. Fish should continue to follow this versus as it develops. Appreciation from Goat vs. Fish. So, Goat and Fish, that has been a versus of Goat vs. Fish. We appreciate you joining Goat vs. Fish. Moby was taken. Celebration for your subscription to Goat vs. Fish. We will have more verses. We will have some marbleization coming up on Goat vs. Fish. We are going to have all kinds of celebrations of Goat vs. Fish on Goat vs. Fish Thursday as Goat vs. Fish Thursday continues. But now Goat vs. Fish has to go and has to edit Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish has to edit Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish has to edit Goat vs. Fish. So if you want to join Goat vs. Fish for an editing session of Goat vs. Fish, then you can join the unpaid intern of Goat vs. Fish. You can join the unpaid intern of Goat vs. Fish as we preparation to send you to the unpaid intern of Goat vs. Fish. As we preparation to send you to the unpaid intern of Goat vs. Fish. Thank you for joining Goat vs. Fish. This has been a versus of Goat vs. Fish. And we definitely, with 56 radiation points a poll and 101 months of fish and more bits for fish than for goat and more fish than goat, we definitely have to give the pre-verses to fish. We have to give the pre-verses to fish. We have to give the pre-verses to fish. So let's put that in the verses.
Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence.
Pre-verses goes to fish. Celebration for fish. Pre-verses go to fish.
Repeat after goat versus fish. Dooby 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 dooby.
Celebration for fish.
Dooby 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 dooby.
And thank you for joining Goat versus Fish. You just stay in the verses. You just stay in the verses. You just stay in the verses.
Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Well, goat versus fish came up to me and said a goat or a
Goat
fish.
and Fish, we are going to conduct a radiation.
Do you be goat or a fish? Do you be goat or a fish? Do
We are going to radiation the unpaid intern of Goat versus
because
Fish.
the goats do be goat and the fish
And it doesn't look like the unpaid intern of Goat versus Fish is live right now. But something tells Goat versus Fish that they will be. Stay in the verses for the radiation. Stay in the verses for the radiation. And we'll see you on the next verses of Goat versus Fish Thursday, coming up at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's less than
because the goats do be goat and
15
the fish
hours
do
from
be
now.
fish. The
pitiable fence sitter sits on the fence.